I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with my co-host, Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. Have the sun peaked too early, and a few other important WNBA topics pertaining to the Storm and the Chicago Sky. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. Rachel, the other night we had a battle of some flaming hot teams right now. The Sky and the Sun, and I was going to try and make a pun, but I won't even try it. There's some good options there. But now I just want to put this preface out there because I think a lot of people are going to give me flack for even talking about this or even saying, the topic of the show, has the sun set on the sun, or have they peaked too early? The reason I bring this up, and something that we've talked about a lot over the years, this team has gotten to a point where they have started to show us that they've checked off all the boxes possible for, regular season achievements. Yes, they haven't, they weren't the number 1 or number 2 seed these past 2 years, and at points it really looked like they could be. But I think the biggest question for them is consistency, can they get something done in the playoffs? So for me, the only thing I can get from them during the regular season is consistency, and I didn't see consistency the other night. Free throw shooting less than 60%, 16 turnovers. I mean, not to throw some shade at the Sky, but that's okay if that's an okay number for the Sky. That's not Connecticut Sun basketball. Mm-hmm. So for me, I'm distraught because this is a team that I consistently have high hopes for, and I feel like the consistency isn't there on that end.
Well, I'm going to be one of those people that gives you flack for the title of the show and for even feeling distraught, because I think until, we see like a true rough patch or something, if you will, or, the ship takes a massive turn of events and they just start playing terrible. I just think that, through the course of a season, you have bumps in the road. Through the course of a season, you have games where the ball just isn't dropping, and you play opponents and they're hitting everything. And the Chicago Sky just came out from the jump and they're shooting like 70% in the first half, and it was an evenly matched second half. Actually, Connecticut beat Chicago in the second half, but it was really kind of that second quarter where Connecticut laid an egg. I mean, they were just taking bad shots. They turned the ball over way too much. Chicago shooting, 70%. And you just have those games where nothing's going your way. You don't have the energy. The moment you maybe get something going a little bit, you get a dagger where you turn the ball over and Courtney Vandersloot hits a buzzer beater before halftime. I mean, it was just kind of not their night. So for me, as I was watching that game, you definitely felt for Connecticut because it was like, good God, it was just a bad night. Now, credit to Chicago. They played extremely well. They're playing very well right now. We'll get into that here in a minute, but I'm not concerned about Connecticut. They're not going to come into this season and win every single game. It's just not going to happen. And every team is going to have that game where they're playing somebody and that team's just playing completely out of their what. So I'm not nervous. I'm not freaking out by any stretch. I just think if you're Connecticut, you're Kurt Miller and her staff, his staff, you have to just kind of, learn from it and have a short memory and get ready for this next one. And honestly, the next question is going to be, all right, well, how does Connecticut respond from this? And that's kind of what I'm looking at.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think that's the follow-up to me being concerned. It's not like I'm saying, start bailing the water out of the boat right now and then let's get on the tender. I'm saying, all right, now let's look what's going to happen. This raises my eyebrows. Now, next game, if they can't respond and come back and really show them, what's going down, that's when I start to go, okay, this is concerning. Obviously, anytime you have Strickland going 0 for 5 and 0 for 3 from deep, scoring 0 points, and you have all of your starters in the negative and the plus minus, and I'm talking about negatives in double digits, that's going to be concerning. And I think, in all honesty, if you're talking about the Connecticut Sun, it has to be like a blip on the radar of like, that's just never going to happen. You know what I mean? But it obviously does happen, but it's such a rarity. I agree with that. I just, you know me, I get very concerned when you have a powerhouse like Connecticut who just lays an egg.
Yeah, and I don't even know. I don't even know if you can call this type of game laying an egg. I mean, I guess you could, just looking at numbers. I think they laid an egg in the second quarter, and it was just jump shot after jump shot after jump shot, and I just thought it was bad shot selection. Chicago did a great job of forcing him into turnovers and really capitalizing on those. I guess you could call it laying an egg. And like I said, I'm not concerned because every team in the WNBA is going to have that type of game. We've seen a couple of them where, the Aces came out shooting 75%. Just, that's just an unrealistic percentage. Chicago's not going to shoot like this every single night. It's not going to happen. I mean, maybe, but that would be incredible. It'd be record setting for men and women's basketball. So, I'm not too concerned about it. I think the bigger question mark, as you already said, is moving forward now. Is this going to turn into a rough patch, or is this just going to be a game that was like, oh my God, that was just a game where nothing went our way?
Yeah, and this will all right. Well, we'll pertain from freaking out too much, but I do want to remind fans, much to the chagrin, just that this did happen last year, where this team started off red hot, had a little skid in the middle of the season, and they did recover well, but then they kind of faltered in the playoffs. So I'm just worried because it seems to me like over the past few seasons, Connecticut's been reading the same story, and I'd like them to add a new chapter, a chapter that has a ring. Let's move on to the other team in that ridiculous game, the Chicago Sky, who have just been like straight fire recently. I mean, I remember we were talking about early on in the season, like 3-4 games in, this team is horrible. This team can't play defense. I remember, speaking to Coach Wade after a game, asking him what he liked so far from the season from his defense, and he gave me that what is it? That NBA player who James Harden, the and walk away, nah, there was nothing. And Rachel, what have you seen? Is it as simple as just turning on the defensive effort, or what has been going on with this team? This team is juiced up.
I think we all can agree that Chicago's very talented. It's a roster that has, veteran players, and there's a lot of really fun, exciting kind of younger players. And, we talk a lot about, I think we're now getting into the part of the season where we can no longer really make the argument of, they're gelling, they're figuring it out. We're not in the first, third of the season anymore. And I think Chicago we're seeing kind of the byproduct of what they did go through those first few games of gelling as a team, getting comfortable as a team, getting into that new system. And now they're settling into it, and they've bought into the defensive end of the floor. They were completely physical, and they just swarmed Connecticut in the paint, made everything extremely difficult for them. And I broke down some numbers in an article I wrote recently about Chicago because I really wanted to see what was the difference. And one of the biggest ones has been the turnover numbers. They went from turning the ball over 20 times a game, maybe around there, to about 13 to 14, which is a huge difference. And that's just a massive jump in terms of their ability to take care of the basketball. But we know this is a team that can score, especially in bunches. A lot of different people can step up and score at any given time. So I don't necessarily think the offensive end of the floor is a huge problem. It does become a problem when you're not taking care of the basketball and you're not allowing yourself to get in sort of any offensive rhythm. But it really comes down to that defensive end of the floor. I mean, to start the season, teams were averaging, 80, 90 points a game. They couldn't get stops. Well, then, they went from giving up about 81, 82 points a game to about 70. And then even in the last two, to the Fever, they gave up 76. To Connecticut, they gave up 75. So that number's gone up a little bit. They're giving up about, I think it's 72, maybe 73, just in these last like 6 games. And so that's the difference, is the defensive end of the floor. They've got so many weapons defensively, the athleticism, and there's some size, and they're allowing their defense to fuel their offense, and that's the scary part, because the offensive output is there, especially when you've got Allie Quigley hitting shots and they're clicking, they're taking care of the basketball. You've got anyone at any given point that can step up. But defensively, that's the difference maker for this team, their ability to defend and rebound and finish plays from that aspect.
Well, I was just gonna say, I was shocked you hadn't brought up rebounding yet, knowing you're playing pass, because this team has been like literally. I talk about flipping a switch. I was just skimming the stats from the past few games versus the first few games, and it is astonishing how much better they are rebounding over this last stretch of games.
I group rebounding in there with defense, because you can play a great possession to defense, but if you don't finish it with a rebound, it doesn't matter. So they're doing a lot better job on the glass. They've out rebounded their opponents, I think, in almost every single game. These last 6 games, kind of what I'm referencing in terms of just being a difference maker. And Connecticut is a great rebounding team. So to be able to, do a job on them is big. And so it's the defense and it's the rebounding that we're seeing from Chicago. And I'm not really surprised. I mean, I think we all know the potential this team had if they could just take care of the ball, if they could defend better. That's been the biggest question mark, their ability to defend. We have not seen a Chicago team defend like this in a very, very long time.
And the thing is, with the length and speed of this team, when they are clicking on defense, they move so quickly in transition. I mean, it's hyper speed, and at times it was shocking to me, because I think a lot of us think of Seattle and Connecticut as 2 of the fast-paced teams in this league, and definitely the Sky are in that conversation also. But to see the Sky just exhausting Connecticut at times with how fast they were pushing the pace was extremely impressive. I mean, you got to give props and wonder if James Wade is going to bring home. Do they do a monthly Coach of the Month or whatever? I feel like they do,
so, but I don't know. I'm most excited, not to interrupt you too much, but I'm really excited about this Wednesday. They're hosting the Mystics, and that's going to be a true test, of your defense.
Have not beaten Washington since the Elena Deladon trade,
right? And that's a very interesting stat. Last time they matched up was earlier this month, and Washington just kind of routed them, close to about 20 points. Washington scored over 100. So this is going to be like the ultimate test, with Washington being such a powerhouse offensively. Can they get those stops? Can they slow down this Washington offense? And honestly, these are 2 really high octane offenses. And we've talked a lot about their offenses, but these are 2 teams that are defending really well right now too, which has been the difference maker for Washington and the Sky in the success they've had. They're defending better. Both teams are. So I'm really excited for Wednesday in that matchup.
I want to ask you something. We had Steph Dolson on the show last year, and we talked to her about kind of, all right, this is your 2nd season. Now we're in her 3rd season of being in Chicago. Kind of what's the feel of when you go to DC or you play against DC? Is there that rivalry? And she was pretty blunt about it and said, yeah, maybe the first game, but after that, we kind of move on. We're professionals. She's not the only player who was affected by that trade, by the moving of one of the best players in the league or in the world, as you so eloquently put it, commentator Lady Peldon. My question to you is, do you think that, ignoring the shellacking that Chicago got in DC last month or earlier this month, do you think there's an added motivation for Chicago that DC just doesn't have in this game? Or is that more of a fan thing?
I'm sure there is, especially for some of those veteran players. You've got players that, there's friendships there, there's history there. There's probably a sense of, all sorts of different emotions that come into play. So I'm sure for the Sky, when I talk about those veteran players who did play with Elena, there is added motivation. And I'm sure I would even speak for Elena and say there's motivation for her too. just as a competitor innately, not necessarily in a negative way with anyone. But I definitely think, you as a competitor, you're always looking for added motivation, other storylines, or, things that give you a chip on your shoulder, that kind of give you that extra fire night in and night out. And there's so many different storylines within this league in general, of, players being traded, or people getting waived, picked up by the team. So, I mean, I think you constantly have those storylines that maybe we don't talk about a lot. But this is definitely a big one, having Chicago, host Elena back there. And I think, if I'm Chicago, I have a little more motivation, just to.
Oh yeah. Even some people in front office roles or in other positions in the team.
Well, and I think these are two teams in the top three, kind of vying for Connecticut. Chicago has so much confidence at this point, which is fun to see, and they're playing loose. They're excited. I think they really said it in during that game that they before that Connecticut game, Coach Wade went into the locker room and said, "Hey, we're better than this team." And they all bought into that. They agree with that. They understand that. I think we're seeing a Sky team that's sitting here going, we have the potential to beat anyone any given night in this league, but we understand we can be beaten any given night. But we know we have the talent. We know we have the firepower. And so, Connecticut's going to get everybody's best shot. They're at the top of the standings, but Washington should as well. And now you add in, the fact that they're ahead of Chicago in the standings. You have Elena Delle Donne. They're playing in Chicago. It's going to be interesting. I'm definitely curious to see, after you've routed the best team in the league, how do you respond then playing the second best team in the league? If they can beat Washington, turn around and beat them again and defend and I don't know if you can necessarily limit Elena Delle Donne in certain ways, but, make a big statement in that game, I think then you really, really can get serious about talking about Chicago and their potential, because they're drinking the Kool-Aid right now. Every player, every member of that team believes that they've got the potential to beat anybody, and they believe they're better than everybody. And when a team is feeling like that, that's a dangerous combination.
Oh, it's extremely dangerous. And I mean, I'm excited to see who they match up against Elena, but also I'm excited to see, well, there's a lot I'm excited to see, but it should be a good game. But I will say, if the Sky can pull off a victory in this one, when it comes next week on Monday or on Tuesday, depending when we get it out for the Winsidr power rankings, you have to assume this team's top one. If they top one or two, if they can pull off a win against the top two teams in the league at that given moment, that's got to be like a notice. Put the rest of the league on notice. Hey, we're coming for you. We're the top dogs now, which is a very wild thought to think after we looked at this team, 3 games into the season.
It is, but it's like we're talking about Connecticut. Every team is going to hit a lull or a patch or a rough spot. Chicago, we know their potential, but I'm not bought into like this powerhouse like mindset quite yet. I got to see more. I have to see consistency with it. I want to really see them go through and really be dominant on both ends of the basketball for a longer amount of time. And that's the same thing with like Connecticut. Like, we don't have a team in this league this year that's just such a powerhouse. Like last year, Seattle was clearly the most dominant team in the league. This year, you're going to see ebbs and flows. It's going to be a roller coaster for some of these teams, and everybody is going to hit points where it gets ugly. They're going to have rough games. It's all about how do you respond. And I'm always preaching about that. Sometimes I feel like I talk too much about, just the course of a season and what each team kind of goes through. And again, it all comes down to their ability to peak come playoff time, and their positioning, whether they can get a double bye or whatever that may be. But it's got to be all about getting better for each of these teams and understanding that, like, okay, if you do take one to the face like Connecticut did over the weekend, how do you respond? So as I'm rambling, I'm thinking about, all 3 of these teams in particular. When it comes to Chicago, I'm not ready to kind of start talking about them being better than Connecticut or Washington, because I want to see more. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that?
No, I'm definitely with you on that. And if we talk about this all the time, I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I don't, best of five, I'm putting my money on the Sun
For
over the
sure.
Sky. My biggest question, in all honesty, when it comes to the Sun, is I don't trust them on a winner take all game. The Sky, that's a team. That's Rachel, you've talked about dangerous teams before. I think the Sky are a pretty dangerous team because they have that element of surprise, because they have that element of not necessarily that the other team. I think we've gotten enough tape on them beating good teams that it's no longer that you just assume it's a
Right.
cakewalk. But they're definitely good enough, that they could surprise you, like you said, on any given night and beat any team.
And I think it's probably less of a surprise now. The last week, I mean, even with the loss to Indiana, like okay, if they win that game and they're on like a 6-game winning streak, then I'm super hyped up. But you go and you lose to Indiana, which is just nothing personal to the Fever, because the Fever have obviously they're a lot better, and they're competing, and they're a dangerous team. Every team in this league is dangerous, let's be honest. But had Chicago not dropped that one, then I'm probably a little more excited than what I'm seeing right now. I just know this team has the talent and the potential to win it all. It's just a matter of, being consistent with it. And again, I just that loss to Indiana, you're kind of just like, damn, that kind of took the wind out of my sails with the Chicago hype. But then talk about their ability to respond, to lose to Indiana at home, and then you go back 2 days later and you beat the best team in the league. Their ability to respond from that is revealing, and that shows a lot about their character. And honestly, that if anything else is something that we should definitely be taking note of, is how they responded from their loss to Indiana. Now the question is, you're feeling really good about yourself. You just routed the best team in the league. Where's that motivation when it comes to Washington? Are you able to keep that going, or how are you going to respond when you're not shooting 60, 70%? How do you respond when Washington jumps out on you, 10 points in the first half? I want to see kind of more of that fight when things aren't necessarily all going your way.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. And honestly, like hearing you talk about like how do you keep that motivation, it reminded me of something I wanted to bring up when we were talking about the Sun. Of kind of, they've hit all those lists that I talked about. But how do you keep that motivation during the regular season when you've already shown us that you guys, for any given stretch of the season, can be a top team? So that's kind of, it also, not necessarily that it's a worrisome thing, but something that definitely peeks into my mind. And as the season goes on, kind of gets louder and louder. Something I really wanted to talk about. And first of all, before I say this next thing, shout out to James Wade, because he might be pulling the Nicky here, running away first year Coach of the Year award. I think he's kind of the front runner right now, I got to say. Just saying.
That's a very good point.
I mean, props to these first year coaches being able to hit the ground running. A lot of respect for that.
I agree.
Let's talk about Mercedes Russell, because she's a player who I feel like is arguably running away with this most improved player award, because she goes from, playing in a measly 24 games, not a measly 24 games, but 24 games, not starting anything last year, being cut in training camp in New York, signing in Seattle, really finding her own way on this roster. And now this season, she started 7 of 11. She had a career high 15-point game a little bit back against a top team, Washington. All right. Her size gives the Storm a chance to really do some interesting lineups and be able to still use Natasha Howard in a much more flex 5 role, or a flex 4 role, than at least I thought they were going to be able to do going into this season. And I think she's been a huge deal. We talked about Jordan Canada. We've talked about Jewel Lloyd. We've talked about Natasha Howard and Alicia Clark. But I mean, she's a player who's also starting on this team that's getting all this attention, but she's not getting any attention.
Well, and good for you for bringing this up, because she does deserve some attention. With Seattle battling the things they're battling, and injuries and all that, you have these unfortunate circumstances, but the silver lining in a lot of it is, it gives an opportunity for somebody to really step up. And she has, talk about step up. I mean, and talk about a transformation of somebody from their first year to their second year, went from playing 5 minutes a game to 25 minutes a game, which is just incredible. And it's a testament to, there's big shoes to fill, but with Seattle, we were a little bit uncertain as to what did that look like? Who was going to kind of fill those roles as a collective unit. And Mercedes Russell has grabbed this opportunity and taken it by the horns, and she's doing just a fantastic job. Like you said, I mean, I just think she's been really effective. She's been really, pretty consistent. She doesn't always have to score because you've got so many scoring threats still on Seattle, even with Canada out and things like that. But 6'6", like you said, she brings so much in terms of matchups and an ability to play with Howard and defending and just length. And she's I don't know. I just agree with you. I think she's done a really great job. We do need to kind of continue to talk about these players that are getting the opportunity to step up in these roles and are really thriving in them. And she's one of them for sure.
Yeah. So snaps, claps, all that for her. She's been crushing it. And yeah, I just love seeing that matchup because she really, you can tell she takes it as a challenge whenever she's going guys, she's going up against some of the greatest bigs to ever play in this league. You know what I mean? Like she's going up against Sylvia. Yeah. She's going up against Candace. She's going up against Griner. Like these are not easy matchups either.
And this is a player that we didn't talk about last year, and many questioned where would she fall in the line of rosters. And so for still in some ways, because she got so few minutes last year, she's still very much a rookie, very, very young in her experience in this league. You have to give her credit for what she's doing. You really do.
All right, moving on to, well, it would be the elephant in the room, but it missed its connecting flight, so it's still not here. Let's talk briefly, because this could go on for a while and probably get us in some trouble. But the travel issues, last year, Rachel, I heard you were, shout out to Rachel. She was on an ESPN radio show this afternoon talking about the Las Vegas Aces. And it got brought up. This team, Las Vegas Aces, missed the playoffs last year in part to, I would argue that a lot of people like to say, oh, they missed the playoffs because they had to forfeit that game. They were facing a team that went to the finals. So it's not a cakewalk. But that being said, I mean, the travel issue got a lot of attention last year because of that and because of a few other trips. This year, I don't know how many of our listeners follow various athletes on social media, but if you have, it has been horrendous this year. And I personally don't know because I don't have the stats in front of me. And I think this might be outside of women's basketball timeline, his foray of skills. But it seems to me like it's happening a lot more. Or I'm just naive enough to think it's been happening more and the players are giving more attention to it and realizing that they have this ability to express this and put it out there. Do you think that's tied in with the CBA, Rachel?
Well, I mean, these things have been going on since the league began. But now you have the evolution of social media to document everything. And then you have really what the Aces did last year that kind of really – it was a huge hit to them and their potential playoff run, blah, 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 blah. But what they did in making that stand drew so much attention to this. Now you could talk with, Cynthia Cooper and Cheryl Swoops and all of the greats back in the day. I am sure they have countless stories of travel, horror stories of travel. I mean, this is something that these women have battled since the beginning of this league, and I mean, travel is always can be very unpredictable in those types of things. But I really think that what the Aces did last year made this such an important part. And now we're seeing everyone really with a magnifying glass on, and you tie that into the CBA and with social media. Now they can use their voices, they can use their platforms to bring awareness to that this is going on. And so this has become an issue that has always been around, but it's now a really sensitive, heightened issue that they're making very clear. Many players are now about the travel issues, and it's just becoming an even greater topic.
Oh, I mean, it's getting ridiculous. I believe the Indiana Fever played Seattle a day or two ago, depending on when you're listening to this. We're not able to get back to Indiana. So last I checked, they were able to fly into Atlanta, rent a bus, and drive from Atlanta to Indiana.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but my back, I am at the very young age of 29, and my back kills me from taking the quote unquote 3-hour bus from DC to New York. It's 5 hours, but whatever. I cannot imagine what these professional athletes who put their body through the ringer night in and night out, not included. I'm not even talking about training. I'm talking about game seasons and all that jazz. And then you get cramped in this tiny little airplane, probably flying Spirit or something. And then you put them on a coach bus where, I mean, you can't even pay extra to get extra leg room on a coach bus. This is ridiculous.
I will say, because you're talking to someone who has spent probably half my life on a charter bus from college. Sometimes it's nicer to be on a bus because you can get a whole row and you can put your legs up all over the seats and you can kind of spread out a little bit. Now, that's just my silver lining in it because, we're just so unfortunate, that they're not able to just hop on a plane and get back home into their own beds and rest and be prepared for this next matchup against Minnesota. So it's definitely been a circus, that them getting home. It's really unfortunate. Even shocking to hear that they couldn't get a connection from Atlanta to Indianapolis is a little bit bizarre to me with Atlanta being such a major hub. But you have to give them credit that you got to do what you got to do. And this in particular, talking about how do you respond, is going to be, I'm very, very curious to see how the Fever, this young team, handles the media scrutiny of the travel and all that sort of stuff. Is this going to be an excuse? Are they going to be tired when they face Minnesota, or are we going to be ready to go?
Well, and also something, I always ask the teams when they're in DC, I always like to ask them, oh, you're on this traveling, you're on these away games, whatever, blanking on the word, but what does this do for team camaraderie, for the vibe of the team, for the family of the team?
Well,
and I think there is, obviously there's not a positive in this, but there has to be something to be said for that. The team goes through such a, excuse my French, shitty experience that has to bring you together.
There is positives in it because it's adversity, life is going to throw adversity at you. And we could talk about it as an individual, we could talk about it as a team, and it's all about how do you respond from it, and this is, I'm sure, Pokey Chapman and her staff are going to use this as an opportunity of, how do you respond? How do you come together? This is as much as an educational opportunity for this team and all that sort of stuff as it is anything else. And that's the way I look at it. Yeah, it is unfortunate, but the adversity, how do you handle yourself when you've hit adversity? The Connecticut Sun just got punched in the face by Chicago. You weren't necessarily ready to go. Nothing was going your way. That's adversity. How do you respond? So that's kind of what we're talking about, whether it's not being ready to play to a travel delay, things like that. Every team is going to probably face at some point some sort of really rough traveling experience this year. How do you respond from that? So I do see it as unfortunate as it is. And I hate that these women have to go through this. I wish that we could have private jets for everybody with the logos on the side and be able to get back as quickly as possible. I wish and I hope and I pray one day we can have that. But in the meantime, I think you can use this as, like you said, team building, camaraderie. In the face of adversity, how do you respond? And you can challenge your team in that way.
All I know is with the new news about some ownership group trying to make a bid to expand the W to Toronto, Canada, all I can think about is Drake's private jet, and maybe he can get the hookup, get that airline to give us a private jet or two, and then finally my idea of having one or two league planes that just kind of bounce around the whole country, flying the teams and whatnot. Could come to be. I don't know.
You have just the best ideas. Can I tell you
that? I just think it would be amazing, and the content that the league could get from a marketing standpoint of having two teams on traveling together could be ridiculous. But that's for a different time. We believe the players of the WNBA and its community deserve the same in-depth analysis and respect that men's sports receive on a daily basis. Please consider joining our Patreon community to help support us and the hard work that we do. This has been the Winsidr Show.